Since childhood, we are taught that life follows a predictable script: study, graduate, get a good job, build a family, achieve success. But what if this path isn't the same for everyone? What if some of us need more time to truly discover who we are? This is the story of someone who always felt behind everyone else. Someone who grew up hearing they were too slow, that they would never make it, that they were being left behind. But instead of giving up, they decided to question everything. What if, in the end, there is no universal clock for life? What if true success isn't about running faster, but about finding your own rhythm? This is the journey of someone who learned that being late might actually mean being on the right path. Do you know that feeling of always being late? As if everyone else is running at full speed while you're the only one who still hasn't learned to walk? That has always been my reality. Since childhood, I was the last to finish tests, the last to be picked for school teams, and the last to understand jokes. And, of course, people never missed a chance to remind me of it. "You're too slow," teachers would say. "Why do you always take so long?" my classmates would complain. "If you keep this up, you'll never get anywhere," my father would grumble, looking at me with that expression of someone who had already given up on me. Over time, I stopped trying to respond. I just lowered my head and kept going, even if I was the slowest of all. School was a nightmare. I studied, I tried my best, but I could never keep up with the others. I was never a genius at anything. Not in sports, not in music, not in academics. While my friends were deciding on their careers and making plans for the future, I was just trying to survive another day without feeling like a complete failure. And then adulthood arrived. If I was already slow in school, in the real world, I felt like I was standing still. My peers were getting jobs, buying cars, starting families. And me? I was just existing. I found a random job, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The routine was always the same: wake up early, take a packed bus, spend the whole day doing something I hated, come home exhausted, sleep, and repeat it all over again. Nothing changed. Nothing got better. And the voices didn't stop. Still living with your parents? At your age? Haven't thought about going to college? Oh, right, you were never good at studying. Dude, everyone has moved on, and you're still stuck in the same place. It hurts. It hurts more than I can explain. No one saw what was inside me. I wanted to run too, I wanted to get there. But something was holding me back. It felt like I was trying to cross a river with a strong current while everyone else was already on the other side, looking at me impatiently. I started to believe that maybe they were right. Maybe I really was too slow to keep up with the world. And then, everything reached a breaking point. One night, after a particularly horrible day at work, I locked myself in my room and stared at the ceiling. The weight of failure crushed my chest. It was suffocating. So many unanswered questions swirled in my mind. Why me? Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? And then, a thought crossed my mind. What if I'm not actually late? What if I just have a different pace? It was such a simple idea, but it made me feel something different. For the first time, I questioned whether the problem was really with me or if it was society trying to fit me into a pattern that was never mine to begin with. I didn't know it yet, but that small shift in perspective would be the first step toward transforming my life. That night was a turning point. The idea that I might have my own pace kept echoing in my mind. But how could I turn that thought into action? How could I break free from the cycle I was trapped in? The next day, instead of just dragging myself to work, I decided to pay closer attention to the people around me. Who was truly happy? Who had really moved on? To my surprise, I noticed that many who seemed successful were merely surviving. The mechanical routine, the tired faces, the dull eyes. I wasn't the only one who felt that something was off. That's when a second question came to me: what does it really mean to move forward? If moving forward only meant fitting into a mold, then maybe I didn't actually want that. Maybe my path was different. But what was that path? What did I really want? That day, after work, instead of taking the bus straight home, I decided to walk for a bit. It felt strange, but at the same time, liberating. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to slow down without guilt. During that walk, I came across a small neighborhood bookstore. I walked in for no apparent reason, simply following an impulse. I went straight to the self-help section, something I would never have done before. I picked up a random book and started flipping through it. One sentence caught my attention. Success is not a straight line, and everyone has their own time to bloom. That hit me hard. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe my pace wasn't a mistake. Maybe I just needed to find my own way, in my own time. I left the bookstore with that book in hand. Over the next few days, I read every page as if I were discovering a whole new world. I learned about people who took years to find their purpose, who were doubted but persisted. Something inside me lit up. I started reflecting on what made me happy. What did I enjoy doing, even if no one else saw value in it? Little by little, I began to reconnect with forgotten passions. I remembered how much I loved writing, how I always had ideas in my head but never put them on paper for fear they weren't good enough. And there, in that quiet night, I made a decision. I would give myself a chance. I would try to find my own path, at my own pace. The decision to change my life sounded grand in theory, but in practice, it was terrifying. I had no idea where to start. I had spent years believing I was too slow, that I would never catch up to anyone. How could I simply flip that switch and move forward? In the first few days, insecurity paralyzed me. The fear of failure, of what others would think, and most of all, the possibility of trying and discovering that I truly wasn't capable tormented me. But a small voice inside me insisted, what if it works? With that thought in mind, I started taking action. My first step was writing. I had always enjoyed putting my thoughts on paper, but I had never taken it seriously. I grabbed an old notebook that had been buried in a drawer and started writing every night before bed. At first, I had no clear goal, I just let the words flow. I wrote about my feelings, about bad days, about my dreams. It was almost like venting. At first, it didn't seem like much. But something interesting happened. Writing made me feel better. For the first time in a long while, I was doing something just for myself, without the pressure of meeting external expectations. And more than that, I began to notice a pattern in my writing, a deep need to prove that my pace wasn't a mistake. Slowly, I created a routine. Every night before bed, I would write at least one page. At first, they were scattered thoughts, but soon, I started crafting small stories inspired by the struggles I had lived through. And then, I had a moment of courage. One night, after a long day at work, I made the decision to share one of my pieces with a friend. It was someone I trusted, but still, my heart pounded as I handed him the notebook. Every second felt like an eternity. When he finished reading, he stayed silent for a moment. I was already expecting the worst, a forced smile, a polite comment meant not to discourage me. But instead, he slowly closed the notebook and looked me in the eyes. Man, this is good. Have you ever thought about posting it somewhere? I laughed, thinking he was joking. But he remained serious. No, really. You have a way of writing that draws people in. I think others would love this. That caught me off guard. No one had ever said anything like that to me. I was so used to being doubted that I had never even considered the possibility that something I created could have value to others. But at the same time, the idea scared me. Sharing my writing meant exposing myself. What if people didn't like it? What if they laughed at me? The old insecurity tried to pull me back. It took me a few days to build up the courage, but in the end, I decided to give it a try. I created an anonymous profile and posted one of my stories on an online forum. It was a community for aspiring writers, where anyone could share their work and receive feedback. After posting, I stared at the screen for hours, waiting for a reaction. Time moved painfully slow. When I finally decided to close the site and go to sleep, something unexpected happened. A notification. Someone had commented. With trembling hands, I clicked to read it. This touched me in a way I can't explain. "Thank you for sharing." I froze. Someone, somewhere, had read my words and felt something because of them. I had never imagined that anything I wrote could have that kind of impact. In the following days, I kept posting, and the comments started to multiply. Some people related to my stories, while others simply thanked me for sharing. With every message, something inside me changed. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had something valuable to offer the world. That small victory was enough to ignite a fire within me. I still didn't know exactly where this would lead, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving forward. And most importantly, I was doing it at my own pace. After the first wave of positive comments, I realized that something inside me had changed. I still felt afraid, of course, but now there was a spark of hope burning alongside it. For the first time, I was doing something I truly enjoyed, and people were noticing. I kept writing, posting, and engaging with those who left comments. Every new piece of feedback motivated me to improve. I started researching writing techniques, learning how to craft a more engaging narrative. I wanted my words to have an impact, to make people feel something real. Up until then, my forum profile was anonymous. But as I gained confidence, I began to ask myself, why am I hiding who I am? Why am I so afraid of putting myself out there? That doubt lingered in my mind for days. Until one day, without thinking too much, I changed my profile picture. Now, my identity was there. I was no longer just a name without a face. At first, it was terrifying. It felt like I had just opened my life up for judgment. But to my surprise, nothing changed. No one showed up to tell me I wasn't good enough. On the contrary, some people even praised my courage for finally showing who I was. That small decision opened a door I hadn't even known existed. If I could reveal myself here, why not try something bigger? That's when the idea hit me, start a blog. I had never done anything like it before. I spent an entire night researching how to create a free website, tweaking layouts, and trying to understand how everything worked. In the end, it was far from professional, but it was mine. A space that belonged only to me, where I could share my stories without depending on anyone else. On the first day, I had 3 visitors. 2 were my friends. On the second day, 5. By the end of the first week, there were 20. Not much? Maybe. But to me, it was a huge number. It meant that 20 people, somewhere in the world, had taken time out of their day to read something I had written. And there, on that simple statistics screen, I felt something for the first time. I was on the right path. I didn't know where it would lead me. I still had fears, insecurities, and plenty of doubts. But now, for the first time, I was moving. And I had no intention of stopping. Creating the blog was just the beginning. After that exciting first week, I realized that keeping up the pace would be the real challenge. I needed new stories, I had to keep the audience engaged, and, most importantly, I had to stay motivated. At first, it was easy. Ideas flowed, and every new reader gave me a boost to write more. But then, as if the universe were testing my determination, I ran headfirst into my first major obstacle. The criticism came. And I'm not talking about constructive feedback, the kind that helps you improve. I'm talking about the harsh ones, the ones that hurt. Your writing is weak. I've seen better stories than this. There's nothing special about this. Each of those words hit me like a stab. I knew I couldn't please everyone, but reading them made me doubt myself. Were they right? Was I just fooling myself? For a moment, I thought about giving up. But then, something unexpected happened. Someone replied to one of those negative comments. Maybe it's not the best story in the world, but at least he's trying. And that's more than most people do. I didn't know that person. But that simple response reminded me why I had started in the first place. I wasn't writing to be perfect. I was writing because I wanted to tell stories. From that day on, I changed my mindset. Yes, criticism hurt. But instead of letting it paralyze me, I started using it as fuel. I learned to differentiate between constructive feedback and empty negativity. Instead of avoiding my mistakes, I started studying them. And with that, my writing evolved. It didn't take long for negative comments to become the minority. My loyal audience was growing, and the people who truly cared about my story were there to support me. I realized that true success wasn't about the absence of criticism, it was about my ability to keep going despite it. And for the first time, instead of asking myself, what if I fail, I started thinking, what if I succeed? After learning how to deal with criticism, something changed inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was making progress, even if slowly. My blog was growing, my stories were improving, and most importantly, I was finally believing in my own potential. But that's when life decided to test my determination once again. Work, which was already suffocating, started demanding even more from me: extra hours, tight deadlines, constant pressure. The accumulated exhaustion made me question whether I could keep writing. I would come home drained. I'd sit in front of my computer and stare at the blank screen. The words, which once flowed so easily, now felt distant. Insecurity started creeping back in. Maybe I don't have time for this. Maybe writing isn't for me. Maybe I should give up now before I disappoint myself even more. But then, in the midst of this whirlwind of doubts, something unexpected happened. I received an email. It was from a reader. He said he had stumbled upon my blog by chance and that one of my stories had helped him through a difficult time. I was feeling lost, without direction, but your story made me realize that I'm not alone. Thank you for writing. Those words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't just writing for myself. My journey, as simple as it seemed, was impacting other people. At that moment, I understood I couldn't stop. Even if it was exhausting, even if it was hard, even if I had to sacrifice a few hours of sleep. I had a purpose. From that day on, I changed my routine. If I didn't have time, I made time. If I lacked energy, I found motivation in those who believed in me. If doubt crept back in, I reminded myself why I started. And then, in the middle of the chaos of my life, something incredible happened. One of my texts went viral. At first, I didn't even notice. My blog had always had a modest flow of visitors. A few dozen people a day, sometimes a little more. But that morning, when I opened the page, I was shocked. The numbers were off the charts. Thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. My inbox flooded with messages. One of my texts had spread across the internet. I wasn't sure exactly how, but someone had shared it, and suddenly, it was everywhere. People saying the story touched them, that they related to it, that they cried, that they felt understood. It was surreal. For years, I had lived with the feeling of always being behind, always falling short, always one step back. And now, something that came from my mind was impacting so many people. At that moment, I allowed myself to feel proud. But along with the euphoria came fear. Now what? What would I do next? Was it just luck? Could I ever do it again? The doubts crept back in. But unlike before, this time, I had an answer for them. I would keep writing. With or without virality. With or without recognition. Because, in the end, writing wasn't just about being seen. It was about expressing myself. It was about giving voice to the stories inside me. And for the first time, I didn't feel behind anymore. I was simply moving at my own pace. The impact of that text went far beyond what I had imagined. People started following me, sending me messages, asking if I had more stories. And for the first time, I found myself facing a reality I had never considered before: maybe I could make a living from this. The idea was terrifying. My whole life, I had been taught that success meant stability, a good job, a steady paycheck, a predictable path. I had never seen writing as anything more than a hobby. But now, something inside me started questioning whether that old concept of success still made sense to me. What was success, after all? Was it having the latest car? A big house? A respectable job? Or was it something deeper? I thought back to all the times I had felt behind, not good enough, like I would never get there. But now, I realized that there was a place no one could truly define. Maybe real success wasn't a fixed point on the horizon, but a journey. And at that moment, I made a decision: I would follow my own path. I kept writing, kept publishing. Opportunities started appearing. Invitations for collaborations, offers to write for bigger platforms. Even the idea of turning my story into a book came up. And more important than all of that, I finally felt complete. Not because I had become famous. Not because I was making a fortune. But because, for the first time in my life, I was doing something that truly made sense to me. And that, to me, was real success.